Hello, I'm Pastor Scott Ingram from Omega Baptist Church in White Pine, Tennessee, and I'm here today again to discuss a difference between the KJV and the NKJV that has been brought to my attention. And I encourage everyone who has a concern about these two translations or even other translations, please leave a comment below and I'll try to get to it as soon as possible. But today is 1 Kings 10:28. Let's go ahead and take a look at the difference, and then we'll begin our discussion on why this difference is there. So here we are, and it speaks of Solomon, King Solomon. Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Keveh. The king's merchants bought them in Keveh at the current price. Now, here we have, and Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yarn. The king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. So here we see we have a difference in the word. And there was recently a video I saw on YouTube made for children that claimed the NKJV translators believed Keveh meant linen yarn. And that showed me right away the animator of the video really hadn't done any study into what this was all about and didn't understand the issues and the long history with this verse among different translations and different translators. Strangely enough, this topic of Keveh also come up in a recent discussion I had with Mark Ward.
1 Kings 10:28. This came up in a kids King James only video that was done by this guy who really knows how to do.
I think I did.
Maybe you saw it, Scott. He had these. It was computer animation, with these like books, and they look fuzzy. It was like really, really well done visually. But 1 Kings 10:28 was one he brought up. Why did they change this in the New King James, whereas the King James has, and Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yarn. The New King James has at that same place. Instead, Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Keveh. The difference between the two, I challenge anybody to, connect that to some sort of doctrinal aberration. This is a very obscure passage that this has no doctrinal meaning. Instead, it's honest disagreements among faithful, careful people about the best way to translate an obscure and difficult Hebrew word. Is it a thing, namely linen yarn, or is it a place, namely Keveh? And if you can actually go back in time throughout the history of Bible translation and see that long, long before the King James Version, was in existence, long before English was even spoken as a language, different translators went different directions with this. This is difficult. The King James translators themselves in their preface say that there are some obscure Hebrew words that even the Jews, they don't know exactly what it means. They just write down something in order to write it. And I find that to be very interesting. This is one of those cases. They're obscure things that people don't necessarily understand, and that scholars are sometimes divided over. I think it's important for us to be humble, as the King James translators encourage us to be, in exactly this kind of situation.
It's so interesting that you picked that one out, because I had another commentator just today ask a question about that particular thing that you were talking about, and it's kind of neat that you would have mentioned that. But yeah, I think we've got to acknowledge there's a mystery, that there's some things within the Word of God that are difficult to understand, and good people, good Christian people, can have disagreements over a word or two.
Yes.
And how that should be interpreted. And
Right.
This is the difference. And so many people just don't understand the difference in a translation and the actual words of God being passed down in Hebrew and Greek. That's such a
Right.
huge difference. It's
Right.
such, when I finally understood that, it was
You're
like
so
a
right.
great leap that I had made in my understanding of what God was doing in
Yes.
preservation. So what is he talking about? Many people have disagreed on the meaning of this Hebrew word, and this didn't start with the KJV and the NKJV. Actually, you can see these differences throughout traditional text, or the Masoretic text, the one that the KJV and the NKJV both use, differences in it over the centuries. So let's take a look at that at TextusReceptusBibles.com. Here at Textus Receptus Bibles, we have an interlinear Bible, and we can actually look over this, see it actually in the language and all these things. In 1769, we see the linen yarn. In the 1611, we see the linen yarn. In 1993, though, we see and from Q. And the king's merchants received them from Q at a price. So there's a difference in 93. And in Young's literal translation, though, of 1862, we see the NKJV's translation of Keveh. Webster's Bible has linen yarn. Bishop's Bible has fine linen. The Geneva Bible has fine linen. But you'll notice the Matthew's Bible of 1537 speaks of Q. And the Coverdale Bible speaks of Rue. And the Wycliffe Bible speaks of Koa. What does all this mean? Why all these differences? The King James and the Spanish version of the King James translation, the Reina Valera, translate the Hebrew word for Q as linen yarn. Other interpreters have understood the Hebrew word to mean a pool, a collection, or a group. But the word Q or Kev or any of these others is widely recognized today to refer to a place, which was called Cilicia in the Greco-Roman period. Since the name Cilicia is better known among speakers of American English than the name Q, translations have used different words to try to point to that specific area. Some explain the location and the significance of these two place names in a footnote. A Good News Translation does that. These are two places of Asia Minor, that is, Musri and Cilicia, that were famous for the breeding of horses, is what we know today. Now, only the NKJV and Young's literal translation, though, translate it with that word, Kev. Arthur Farstad was the general editor for the entire New King James Version, and he wrote a book called In the Great Tradition, which can give us a little bit more understanding of why they chose to use this word, Kev. In the book, you can see he actually gives a reference here about the linen yarn and Kev, the difference here we're talking about, a difference we also see in 2 Chronicles 1:16. Solomon had horses, brought out linen yarn. He says the linen yarn of the KJV does not even seem to be a very good guess in the context of horse trading. We now know that Kev was a place noted for horse breeding. We can get a little bit more of the understanding of what Farstad was saying there if we go look to the Believer's Bible Commentary. He was also the general editor over it. It references the New King James Version in it. So let's take a look at that in my Logos Bible app. So here you see mention is made of the fact that Solomon invested heavily in horses and chariots. Kev, probably Cilicia, was famous for its horses. Solomon not only acquired chariots and horsemen and horses for national defense, but also exported them to other countries. There's a little note here around Kev. It says, Kev, also transliterated Q, was translated linen yarn in KJV because they did not know in the 17th century that it was a place name. So now we can kind of gather together what this Q and the Kev and the linen yarn was all about. This is Cilicia. To transliterate the word directly is Q. And the idea of where they get Kev, I'm going to look at in just a second. But back during that time, the KJV translators assumed this word was meaning the linen yarn, the idea of what the word meant, but they didn't understand it to be a place name because it had not been recognized except for some of these other versions. So they chose to go that way, and these chose to go that way. And the NKJV translators thought, well, it doesn't seem like a very good guess that it's linen yarn, because that doesn't make sense in the idea of the horse trading. And seeing we were looking at this area of Cilicia, which was known for horse trading in the ancient world, we know of today, and obviously there was some kind of a understanding of that back in the older times with some of those other translations. They chose to use it as a place name. So why specifically Kev? In this commentary from the enduringword.com, we see Kev is mentioned again, also known as Cilicia, was in what is now southern Turkey at the east end of the Mediterranean, a prime supplier of horses. And this is a quote from Payne. We're looking here at a historical map of the Neo-Hittite states from 800 BC, based on data from the Tübinger Bible Atlas. And here we see that area of Q, right? Right here it is that we've been looking at, transliterated as such. So you see this word, Kev, Q, Cilicia, all these different terms refer to this area. And that's what Kev is trying to relate to the reader. It takes a little bit of study to figure these things out, but that's what is gathered. The linen yarn, the NKJV translators didn't think that fit what was being said. Could it be linen yarn? Perhaps that is the case, that it is. The big deal here is, what does it matter? What's the point of this verse? The main point of this verse is that he was working and doing this trading, right? And the fact whether it was linen yarn or it was speaking of this place, if it's the place, it seems to make sense that be the case of what's going on. But it's not as big a deal as some will make it out to be. Translation has some little nuances that need to be looked at. And when someone goes and they take that little nuance, that little difference, they are trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. They are trying to make a big deal out of linen yarn or this place name, which was kind of back and forth even in the earlier years, this idea coming down through the centuries. Is this a big deal? No, this isn't a big deal. And for one to try to make it a big deal is trying to pull the linen yarn over people's eyes to make them think that there's this big difference between the KJV and the NKJV when there's not. So I hope this has been helpful with you in understanding what this difference is in 1 Kings 10:28. And I want to thank you for watching. And again, please leave any comments, questions, or concerns you have on this video. And please let others know who ask you about Kev in the future. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying the sermons here and have subscribed to my channel on YouTube, but I would love even more to meet with you in person at the church where I'm blessed to pastor at in White Pine, Tennessee, Omega Baptist Church.